everyone, it's Kevin, and in this video, I'll walk through how to create this balloon greeting in Blender 3D with grease pencil. This is inspired by a piece I made last year. I wasn't able to make it into tutorial at the time, so I thought it'd be fun to do for this upcoming Valentine's Day. The focus here is mostly on the balloons, and it doesn't need to be a heart, so feel free to experiment. This is great for beginners to Blender 3D or for those interested in achieving a stylized look with Eevee. How we'll go about this is by modeling the base elements first, which are the heart ornament and balloons. Then we'll shade the meshes with a watercolor-like and painterly shader, and then use grease pencil for additional elements and details. If you don't know what grease pencil is, it's an object within Blender that allows you to draw 2D in a 3D environment. And if you want to learn more about it, you can check out my bakery shop and cake tutorials. You don't need to know how to draw, and the majority of this project can be done without a tablet, although it might be helpful to have one once we get to that part. Alright, let's get started. Also, real quick, I'll have the project file from this tutorial available to download on my Gumroad, so if you'd like to reference that, I'll leave a link below. So here I'm in a new Blender file using version 3.4 and in the layout workspace. To start, we'll adjust a few scene settings. Let's go to the Render Properties tab here, and just to clarify, we'll be using Eevee to render this out. Scroll down to Color Management and change the View Transform dropdown from Filmic to Standard. This will change our view and allow the colors to appear accurately according to the style we're going for. Also, I generally change the look right underneath it to medium-high contrast. It's a personal preference, but it makes the colors appear more vibrant. Next, go to the Output Properties tab. I want this animation to be a bit longer, so I'll change the frame end to 360. Lastly, we'll need the free Grease Pencil Tools add-on. If you don't have it already, you can go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, searching Grease Pencil Tools, and checking the box to enable it. Then close out of this window. This add-on has many essential Grease Pencil features, and we'll be using the texture brushes that come with it. We'll begin by modeling, so keep the viewport shading set to solid, and we'll start with the heart ornament. Select this cube and delete it with X. Then hit Shift A and bring in a mesh circle. Go into front view with numpad 1 and rotate it by typing RX90 so it's upright. Tab into edit mode and hit 1 for vertex select, or by clicking this button up here. Let's also toggle proportional editing, which is this radial looking button towards the center, and click the drop down to select sharp fall off. To make the top portion of our heart, select this point at the center and pull it down with G then Z to where it's about 2 grid squares above the x-axis line. And to clarify, I'm using default units. Feel free to adjust the radius of the proportional editing with your middle mouse wheel. Then select the bottom center point and pull it down 3 grid squares in the Z to make the pointed bottom of the heart. Again, adjusting the proportional editing radius as needed. Make any other adjustments to the shape. I'll probably bring these 2 points here down a bit. Once you're done, toggle off proportional editing with O. Then hit A to select all the points and F to fill them. And now we have our heart. With the points still selected, go into left view with Control numpad 3 and extrude the points with E about 3 grid squares to the left along the Y. Tab back into object mode, select the heart, and right-click and select Set Origin to Geometry. Then, with it selected, hit Shift D then Y to duplicate it and shift this over to the right about 1.5 grid squares. Go into front view with numpad 1, hit N to bring up the side menu, and scale this down until it's about 0.74 in the X, Y, and Z. Position the smaller heart down in the Z until it's roughly in the middle of the top and bottom of the larger heart. Then select both hearts and hit Ctrl A to apply scale. Now we'll do some beveling. Select the larger heart, tab into edit mode, and hit 3 for face select. Select the front face and hit Ctrl B to bevel it slightly, increasing the number of segments with your middle mouse wheel to form a nice curve. If you don't have a middle mouse wheel, you can adjust the number of segments from the bevel menu in the bottom left that appears upon confirming. Tab into object mode, and let's add a subdivision surface modifier with levels 2 by hitting Ctrl 2 or by going to the Modifier Properties tab and selecting it from the list. Tab back into edit mode and toggle X-ray with Alt-C or by clicking this button up here. Hit 2 for edge select, and while holding Alt, loop select this edge at the top center. Toggle off X-ray and bevel it slightly with Ctrl B so the sharp dip remains. Then let's add a loop cut with Ctrl-R lengthwise along the heart in the X and slide it back in the Y so the back face is flatter. Now tab into Object Mode and select the smaller heart. Tab into Edit Mode and with Face Select, select the front face of the heart. Bevel it with Ctrl-B like before and increase the number of segments with your middle mouse wheel until it rounds down into the larger heart. Then switch to Edge Select and while holding Alt, loop select the edge at the top center and bevel it slightly to again maintain that sharp dip. Then tab into Object Mode and hit Ctrl-2 to add a subdivision surface modifier. With the hearts modeled, parent the smaller heart to the larger one by shift selecting the smaller one, then the larger one, and hitting Ctrl-P and selecting Object. Right-click and select Shade Auto Smooth. Lastly, with them still selected, hit M to send them to a new collection named Heart Ornament. Make any other adjustments, and then make sure to save. With our hearts done, we'll move on to setting up a camera. We'll want to set up an initial angle early on to help with framing the other elements in our scene. To do so, bring in a new viewport by going to the top right of the window and click dragging on the cross to the left. In the left viewport, go into Camera View with numpad 0 to reference it. Collapse this side menu with N. Then we'll adjust our camera object in the right. Go into Front View with numpad 1 and hit Alt-Control numpad 0 to set the camera. Then select the larger heart, click the View dropdown on top of the viewport, go to Align View, and select Align Active Camera to Selected. Then you'll see our camera aligned to our heart ornament. Select the camera object, go into Top View with numpad 7, and bring this back in the Y slightly, about a larger grid square and a half. Then bring this up in the Z so that the heart is within the bottom half of the frame. Let's also make some positioning adjustments to our heart ornament. Go into Top View with numpad 7 and select the larger heart. Shift this closer to the camera in the Y, about a grid square. Let's rotate it upright slightly by typing RX -20. Then rotate it to the side with RY -15. And now our heart is positioned. Make sure not to apply any transforms here. Select the camera object and hit H to hide it for now. With our heart created and positioned, we'll move on to our balloons, and we'll have two of them, a large and small one. Make sure the 3D cursor is set to the world origin with Shift-C. Then hit Shift-A and bring in a mesh sphere. In the side menu, under Scale, let's make it 0.55 in the X, Y, and Z, and bring it up with G, Z slightly. Tab into Edit Mode, and with Point Select, select the very bottom point of the sphere. Go into Front View, toggle on Proportional Editing with O, and make sure the falloff is still set to Sharp. Bring the point down with G then Z about 3 to 3.5 grid squares, or until we get a sharp point at the bottom of the balloon shape. Make any other adjustments to your liking. I think I'll loop select this ring in the middle of the balloon and enlarge it with S to form a smoother curve. When you're finished, toggle off Proportional Editing. Tab into Object Mode and right-click Shade Auto Smooth. Then hit Ctrl-A and apply Scale Transforms. Rename this large balloon by hitting F2 or by going to the outliner. Then let's duplicate this with Shift-D and shift it up in the Z slightly. Scale this down until it's about 0.58 in the X, Y, and Z and rename this to Small Balloon. Hit Ctrl-A and apply Scale Transform again. And now we have our two balloons. Select both of them and hit M to send them to a new collection named Balloons. Then hide the smaller one with H for now. Next, we'll create our arrangement. I want these balloons to stem from the world origin here and extend out into a V shape upward. Change the transform pivot point to 3D cursor by either hitting period and selecting it from the radial menu, or by clicking the icon up here and selecting it from the list. Make sure the left viewport is still set to the camera view, and we can collapse this toolbar with T. In the right, let's go into Front View with numpad 1. Also, click on the viewport shading dropdown at the top, and under Color, select Random. This will make all the meshes a different color for better visibility. To ensure our balloons are always rotated to the world origin, we're going to use an object constraint. Hit Shift-A, bring in a plane axis empty, and rename it Balloon Control. Then select the large balloon, go to the Object Constraint tab, and select a Track to Constraint. For target, I drop the plane axis empty, and then the balloon's rotation will be locked to the position of the empty. select the large balloon, and we'll duplicate this a few times, arrange it, and then add more as needed. So duplicate it with Shift D and rotate it with R to the left a bit. And notice how it's using the 3D cursor as the pivot point. Now we can just use G and rely on the object constraint to adjust the rotation, but transforming with respect to the 3D cursor allows us to arrange our balloons in a cone shape. Also, it's fine if they're touching here since we'll adjust the spacing later. I'll duplicate it again and rotate it to the right. Then I'll duplicate this one in the center, rotate it to the right slightly, and shift it up in the Z. To make sure it moves along the correct angle, hit Z twice to go by the local axis. And you'll know it's correct if the Z-axis reference line appears as a slant through the cursor, and it'll say local up here as well. I'm going to fix this arrangement from the front first, and then I'll do it from the side. Now, there isn't a special formula, so feel free to position them however you'd like. Just make sure they're arranged with respect to the 3D cursor and are fairly close together. I'll duplicate this balloon about 6 more times to make this arrangement dense. When you're finished, go into left view with Ctrl Numpad 3. Select the balloons individually and rotate them with R so they're not intersecting. Try not to rotate the balloons too far in front of the heart ornament. If you need spacing, prioritize rotating behind it. Physics-wise, it won't make sense, but it'll work for the composition. If you need to get out of orthographic view to position your element, make sure to lock your rotation with R then X or R then Y as needed. And again, if you are moving the balloons up or down, make sure to do so by their local axis, pressing Z twice. Reference the camera view to check if it's to your liking, and use the grid squares as guides to help. Now, using the object constraint lines as guides, make sure the balloons don't intersect any of the paths to the 3D cursor. This is because we'll add strings later. If you'd like to add more balloons, hold off for now as we'll have an opportunity to do so later. When you're finished with the large balloons, unhide the small balloon and add a track 2 object constraint targeting the plane axis empty. Then go into front view and repeat the same process. I'll duplicate this about 4 times to fill up any gaps and add some variety. Make any other positioning adjustments needed. Next, we'll move on to shading, starting with our background color. Make sure to save your work. Collapse this second viewport by right-clicking in the middle here, selecting Join Areas, and moving the cursor over to the right. Switch the viewport shading to Material Preview by hitting Z and selecting it from the radial menu, or by hitting the button up here. Then click the Viewport Shading dropdown and toggle Scene Lights and Scene World. Go to the World Properties tab, which is this globe-looking icon, and select a lighter color. I'll pick a light pale yellow. Then switch the timeline down here to the shader editor by clicking this button on the left and selecting it from the list. Let's also collapse this side menu with N. We'll start with the heart ornament. All the shaders in this scene will be based off a general one with the colors changed. If you've seen my simple stylized shaders video, I'll have a link below. This is the same one you can find there. Select the smaller heart, click New, and rename this Heart Ornament. We'll create a basic toon shader setup. Hit Shift A and search Shader to RGB. Then place it right after the BSDF. Hit Shift A again, search Color Ramp, and place it right after the Shader to RGB node. Then change Linear to B-Spline. The look of this shader can be altered with lights, so to see the gradient, bring in a new light source by hitting Shift A, Light, and then Point. Then shift it along the Y in front of the heart ornament. In the Object Data Properties tab, set the power to about 500 and uncheck Shadow. Click back on the smaller heart, and in the base color of the BSDF, lower the value to about 0.145. Now we'll add the texture. Move to the left of the BSDF, hit Shift A, and bring in a Voronoi texture. For this part, I'll walk through the specific values I used for this project, but feel free to play around with them after. Set scale to 7. Connect the position into the normal input. Then bring in a geometry node, and then a noise texture node. Set the noise texture to 4D, scale to 5.4, detail to 3.8, and roughness to 0.55. Hit Shift A and bring in a mix node. If you're using a previous version, this node is called Mix RGB. Set this to color, mix to linear light, and factor to 0.54. Plug the normal from the geometry node into slot A and the color from the noise texture into slot B. Then plug the result from the mix node into the vector input of the Voronoi texture. Lastly, for more control over the texture, we can add a mapping and texture coordinate node. If you have Node Wrangler, you can just select the noise texture and hit Ctrl T. If you don't, you can bring in these two nodes separately, a mapping and texture coordinate node, and connect them accordingly. And that's the setup. Now we'll adjust the colors. Going to our color ramp, I want the base color of this heart to be a red. So I'll change this black to a deep red, almost maroon. Shift it closer to the white slider and change this white to a soft yellow. Now to make this transition more vibrant, add another slider in between and make it an orange color. Feel free to experiment and adjust the sliders and light as needed. Before we move on, let's create another new material on this mesh. Go to the Material Properties tab, click the plus up here, and select New. Rename this to Outline and ignore this material for now. We'll come back to this later. Copy these materials to the larger heart by shift selecting it, then the smaller heart, hitting Ctrl L and selecting Link Materials. I want to adjust the coverage of the larger heart separately from the smaller one, so let's select it, make sure the heart ornament material is selected in the Material Properties tab, and click this number at the top of the shader editor to make a single user copy. Then we can shift these sliders to the left until we get the desired coverage. Now let's apply these materials to the balloons. While holding Shift, select one of the large balloons, then the smaller heart, and hit Ctrl L to link materials. Click on the balloon and make a single user copy of the textured material by, again, clicking the number here and renaming it Balloon Red. Then, while holding Shift, select all the other balloons, then the one with the balloon shading on it, and hit Ctrl L to link the materials. Click back on the first balloon with the shading, and now we can adjust the coverage. To help us, I'm going to duplicate this light object near the heart and bring it up in the Z right in front of the balloons. Then I'll lower the power in the Object Data Properties tab to about 150 watts. Let's also delete the default light source to the right here. And side note, we'll be using many lights here to augment the overall look. So go back to the light source we just made and place a few duplicates around the arrangement to help with the color coverage. For these duplicates, I'll lower the watt value to about 25 to 100. Also, I'm being mindful that the general light direction is coming from the front. We don't need to be too rigid on the lighting positions here since they'll definitely change as we go through the tutorial. It'll just be helpful to have some positioned when we color our balloons in the next part. Now for the different colors. I had about 6 different ones in this arrangement. You might end up with more, but I'll just walk through what I did. So the first color was this balloon red color. Clicking back on that large balloon, I actually made the darker color more of a purple to differentiate it from the heart ornament. I lightened the light color by lowering the saturation a bit, and I also made the middle color a bit more beige so the gradient was smoother. Lastly, I adjusted the slider positions to see more of the middle color. To create the next color, click on this number to make a single user copy and rename this Balloon Teal. So here, I made the darker color a deep purple, the middle color a light green blue, and the light color a bit more green. Then I shifted the slider positions as needed. When picking these colors, I picked ones that were either adjacent to each other or semi-complementary. This helped provide a richness to the different tones as opposed to just staying monochromatic, and it helped in making the arrangement look cohesive. So to avoid getting a random assortment of colors that may not work together, it's important that some of these tones are relative to each other. So for example, the purples in the teal and red balloons are a unifying element. Let's apply this color to some of the balloons in the arrangement by shift selecting a few, then the teal balloon and hitting Ctrl L. To create the next color, let's click another balloon and make a single user copy from the textured material. Rename this Balloon Orange. For the darker color, I picked a deep blue, and for the middle color, a warm beige. I also lightened the yellow color and adjusted the slider positions, bringing in more of the yellow. Shift select a few balloons, then the orange one, and link the materials with Ctrl L. Also, feel free to adjust the lighting as needed. Moving on to the next color, click one of the smaller balloons and make a single user copy from the textured material. Rename this to Balloon Green. I made the darker color a blue, the middle color a green, and adjusted the sliders. Select a few random balloons and link the materials. For the next color, select another balloon and create a single user copy. Rename this balloon pink. I'll change the dark color to a blue and the middle color to a warm pink. Then link it to a few of the other balloons. For the last color, let's click on this balloon and create another single user copy. Rename it to balloon purple. For this one, I made the darker color a blue and the middle color a very light purple. At this point, feel free to reassign the colors and move lights around until you get something you're happy with. This is also where I'd suggest adding more balloons if you'd like. I'll be sticking with the amount we already have. Unfortunately, there isn't a direct instruction I can provide for this part as it's a bit loose, but here are some tips that might help. The first is I used many lights but with a pretty low watt value, around 25 to 50. You don't want the colors to be blown out and will need that contrast between the light and dark. And the second is to make sure you don't have any drastically different values from the rest of the composition. To quickly check your values, go up to the Compositing tab and click Use Nodes. Hit Shift A and bring in a Hue and Saturation value node. Place it right after the Render Layers node and bring down the saturation to 0. Then hit Shift A again, bring in a Viewer node, and connect the nodes accordingly. We should then see our arrangement in black and white. Now, if you don't see a composite in the background, you can click this button to render something out. To zoom in and out, you can hit V and Alt V respectively. Through compositing, we've removed the color of our render to see the light and dark values more clearly, and it should still be identifiable as a balloon arrangement. But for this specific piece, any values that are very dark may look off. If you're having trouble getting colors to work together, it may have to deal with this. Let's mute the Hue and Saturation node for now by selecting it and hitting M. Go back to the Layout workspace and make any other adjustments needed. When you're finished, select all the lights in the outliner while holding Shift, and then hit M to send them to a new collection named Lights. Make sure to save. Now, we'll move on to creating outlines around our meshes. There's a couple of ways we can do this, but here we're going to use the Solidify and Backface culling method. This is dependent on two things. The first is the faces of our mesh, and the second is scale. Let's check our faces first. Click the Overlays dropdown at the top and toggle Face Orientation. All the meshes will either turn blue or red. If blue, that means those faces are oriented in the correct way, and if red, that means they're not. To fix the red ones, click on the offending meshes, tab into Edit Mode, hit A to select all, and then Shift N to recalculate normals. When you're finished, click the dropdown and toggle off Face Orientation. Now for scale, we'll just need to make sure the value of all the meshes is 1 in the X, Y, and Z. Again, you can check this in the side menu with N. If you followed along and haven't resized any of the meshes, then they should already be at 1. If they aren't, you can select the specific mesh and hit Ctrl A to apply scale. To add the outline, click one of the large balloons, go to the Material Properties tab, and click on the outline material we made earlier. For surface, select emission, and for the color of our outline, I'll select a brown-red color, but feel free to pick another. Then I'll set the strength to 1.5. Go down to Settings and make sure Backface culling is toggled. Then go to the Modifier Properties tab and select the Solidify modifier. Expand normals, toggle flip, and in Materials, set the offset to 1. Decrease the thickness to about -0.02 meters. Then apply this modifier to the other meshes by shift selecting all the balloon meshes, the heart ornament meshes, and the outline one last. Hit Ctrl L and select Copy Modifiers. Then the outline will be applied to all the selected meshes. Now we'll move on to drawing with grease pencil, starting with the heart ornament. But first, to make things easier, we'll do a bit of prep work. There aren't a lot of grease pencil elements here, but for some of the ones we will add, it's easier to have a level drawing plane. Change the shader editor down here to the dope sheet. Hit period to change the transform pivot point to median point. Select the large heart, and with your playhead at frame 1, hit I to keyframe and select location and rotation. Then go to frame 0 or press left arrow and hit Alt R to reset the rotation, and then hit RX90 so that the heart is upright. Then hit I to keyframe the location and rotation again. I'll expand this summary in the timeline to see the keyframes. So what we've done here is created a level drawing plane at frame 0, which is the frame we'll be drawing on, with the original location at frame 1. With our playhead at frame 0, hit Shift A and bring in a grease pencil blank. Then hit M to send it to the heart ornament collection. Now, if you're using a more recent version of Blender, you should see the grease pencil frames in the dope sheet. If you don't, change the editing context dropdown to grease pencil. Go to the Material Properties tab, and let's create 2 new materials. For the first material, rename the layer that's created to Outline GP, and under Stroke, let's make it the same color as the outline around our meshes. And just to clarify, meshes and grease pencil objects don't share the same materials. Click on one of the meshes, hover over the color box of the outline, and hit Ctrl-C to copy it. Then click on the grease pencil object in the outliner. Hover over the color box and paste the color with Ctrl-V. Create another new material, name it Ribbon, and paste it in the stroke color we just copied. Then check Fill and select a blush beige color. Go to the Object Data Properties tab and rename the layer that's created to Ribbon and uncheck Use Lights. Then shift right-click near the edge of the smaller heart to place the 3D cursor and go into Front View. Go into Draw Mode by hitting Ctrl-Tab and selecting it from the radial menu. Set the stroke placement up here to 3D cursor and the drawing plane to front. Make sure the radius is about 15 to 20 pixels. Uncheck Use Pressure and Strength to 1. Uncheck Use Pressure. Select the Draw tool and you can pop out the toolbar with T. Then right-click to make sure your active material is Ribbon and draw these organic ruffle shapes coming out from the right side of the smaller heart. So I'll fan it out 2 to 3 times and then come back in. I'm just layering these shapes one at a time and they don't have to be even. To edit these strokes, you can either tab into edit mode to move or delete them, or you can Control-Tab into sculpt mode and use any of the tools there, like smooth and grab. Also, to access these tools quickly, you can hit Shift Spacebar. Now, if you want to adjust specific strokes separately from the others in sculpt mode, you can use masks. To toggle that, click any of the selection controls at the top and I'll select Stroke. Then you can select the specific strokes either in edit mode or by clicking the selection tool here, clicking the specific strokes, switching to the desired tool, and editing them. To deselect, you can hit Alt-A and you can click on the selection control again to toggle off the mask. Now I want to duplicate these ruffles for the other side, so tab into edit mode and make sure proportional editing is off. Hit A to select all, Shift D to duplicate, and type RZ180 to flip it. Then shift it to the left with G then X for the other side. Go into draw mode and make any other adjustments needed. Next, we'll create the details inside the ribbon. With your playhead still at 0, create a new layer named Ribbon Details and uncheck Use Lights. In draw mode, right-click to switch your material to Outline GP, and for this part, because I'm using a tablet, I'm going to toggle Use Pressure for radius, but again, it's not necessary. I'll just create these lines within the ruffles for both the right and left sides, and I'm trying to distribute the strokes evenly. Once you're finished, we'll create the texture inside the ribbon. For this part, we just need to activate the brushes that come with the Grease Pencil Tools add-on we enabled in the beginning. In Draw mode, go to the Active Tool and Workspace Settings tab, click the Brush Specials dropdown, and select Download and Import Texture Brush Pack. Once you click on that, it'll say the brushes have been installed at the bottom here. With your playhead still at 0, go to the Object Data Properties tab and create a new layer above the ribbon layer. Also, click the Layer Specials dropdown and toggle Auto Lock and Active Layers. Rename the new layer to Ribbon Texture and set the blend mode to Divide and uncheck Use Lights. Go up here to change the brush to one we installed. I'm going to select this first oil paint brush, and we'll be using Color Attribute for this, which is the other mode used to color with Grease Pencil. To briefly explain the difference, up until this point, we've been creating base materials in Material Paint mode in our Material Properties tab, and these brushes are created in the same way, except they have a texture attached to the stroke, hence this material here. In order to use different colors with this material, we use Color Attribute to paint over them, By default, this brush already uses color attribute, and we can check that by going up here. This icon is color attribute, and this is material paint. So it's pinned to color attribute, meaning that anytime we select this brush, it'll use this mode. And by clicking on this box, we can pick whatever colors we want to use with it. But to quickly demonstrate, if we unpin it by clicking this pin icon and switch to material paint, and I'll just remove the blend mode for a sec, it'll use the stroke color as specified in the material properties tab, which is black. Now you could change this color to whatever you'd like, but the advantage of using color attribute is that you can easily switch between multiple colors with one material. I'll delete those strokes and reset everything. Let's pick a yellow-green color, and I'll set the radius to 500 pixels with use pressure toggled. Then I'll go over the inner parts of the ruffles, and I'm just clicking within the strokes. When you're finished, switch the brush to this red spray one, and let's pick a very light yellow color. I'll also set the radius to around 200 pixels and go over the inner part again to give it a more varied look. Then lower the opacity to about 0.75. Now we'll move on to writing on the heart. Create a new layer above the ribbon details layer, rename it to text, and uncheck use lights. Create a new material and rename it to text. Copy over the outline color we've been using, but make it a bit lighter and redder. Select our original brush, which was the pencil tool, make sure the material is set to text, set the stroke placement to surface with an offset of 0.025 and radius to 45 pixels. Uncheck use pressure, and switch to material paint mode. Now hide the light collection in the outliner. This is because with surface stroke placement, we can accidentally draw on those objects. Also, switch the viewport shading to solid to see better. Toggle off X-ray if it's on, and make sure you're still in front view with numpad 1. I'm going to write "Be Mine," but you can write whatever message you want. Rotate your view to check that it's sitting nicely in the heart, and go back into front view to fix it. Now, I want to create some detail lines on top of the heart to give it some definition, so let's create a new layer underneath the text layer and rename it to Heart Details. Uncheck Use Lights and set the radius back to 15 pixels with Use Pressure toggled. Right-click to set the active material to Outline GP. Then follow the inner part of the heart shape. You can also hold down Shift while drawing to enter a pulled string mode. When you're finished, switch back to Material Preview mode and toggle on the light objects. I want to add another heart shape on top of the ribbon ruffles to outline the smaller heart. Let's switch our stroke placement to 3D cursor for this, assuming the position hasn't changed, and draw. Rotate your view to check when finished. The last few details I want to make are on the side of the heart. Create a new layer at the bottom of the layer stack, rename it to Side Details, and uncheck Use Lights. In Draw mode, switch the stroke placement to Surface, and just draw a few lines on the side that complement the shape of the heart ornament. Make sure you're in orthographic view with numpad 5 so that you can maintain a consistent offset while using surface stroke placement. When you're finished, go into Object mode and parent the grease pencil object to the large heart mesh by shift selecting it, then the mesh, and hitting Ctrl P. Then go to frame 1 to check it. Now, the text color might be a bit dark, and to help with visibility, I have a rim effect on this grease pencil object. To add that, click on the grease pencil object, go to the Visual Effects Properties tab here, and select Rim. In Offset, set the X to -20 and the Y to 15. Now, you won't see anything as effects are only visible in Render Preview, so if we switch the viewport shading, then it'll be visible. If you find your computer slowing, you can just hide this effect in the Visual Effects Properties tab, and we'll switch back to Material Preview. Feel free to adjust the color and lights as needed, and make sure to save your progress. Before we move on to the next part, we're going to animate our camera. I want it to move subtly from side to side. Make sure the cursor is at the world origin, and if in orthographic view, get out of it with numpad 5. Hit Shift A to bring in an empty sphere. Unhide the camera object in the outliner and parent it to the empty by shift selecting it, then the empty, and hitting Ctrl P. Then let's add another viewport again by click dragging the cross up here. Set the left viewport to the camera view with numpad 0 and collapse this side menu and toolbar with N and T respectively. Then in the right viewport, select the empty object and go into top view with numpad 7. Switch the editing context here to dope sheet if needed and go to frame 1. Rotate the empty to the left slightly and hit I to keyframe the rotation. Then go to frame 180, rotate the empty to the right slightly, and hit I to keyframe the rotation again. Then duplicate the frames at 1 and put them at 360. And now we have a repeating camera movement. Scrub the timeline in the viewport with Alt middle mouse click to check it. At this point, make sure you're good with the placement of your balloons. We'll now create the specs on our balloons and heart ornament meshes. Click back on the grease pencil object and with your playhead at frame 1 or shift left arrow, create a new layer at the top of the layer stack and name it Balloon Specs. Set the blend mode to add and go into draw mode. Switch to the red spray brush. We can keep the color we used previously or use a lighter one. Then set the stroke placement to surface with an offset of 0.015, radius to about 150 pixels with uncheck use pressure, and the strength to 1, uncheck use pressure. We'll rotate our view and orthographically with numpad 5. Let's also hide this side menu. You can do this however you'd like, but the way I've done it is by first covering a balloon with this brush. Then tab into edit mode, hit 2 for stroke select, box select those strokes you made, and then right-click Simplify, Sample, and adjust the length until you get something you're happy with. Then you can go back into draw mode and manually add specs to the balloons. I like to cover the balloon first and then use a combination of smaller and larger brush sizes. To get that galaxy look, some areas on your balloon will need to be dark, so feel free to adjust your lights as needed. Timeline scrub to check the camera view on the left to help with covering all sides of your balloon, and be mindful not to draw on any light objects. Also, hide balloons as needed. To help edit these specs, you can go into sculpt mode to adjust their size, strength, and orientation. Now, another way we can apply specs is through post-processing. Post-processing are adjustments made after strokes have been drawn. For example, I want to add really small specks all around this balloon. Let's set our radius to 50 pixels and shift this menu to the right by holding down your middle mouse button. Click on Stroke and toggle Post-Processing. Set Simplify to about 0.5, and if we draw, you'll see that the stroke is automatically simplified without having to go into edit mode. When I use this method, I like to go in circular motions, and make sure to toggle it off when you're finished. Let's add these specs to all the balloons. Lastly, I want to add these specs to the heart ornament. With your playhead at frame 1, create a new layer named Heart Specs. Set the blend mode to add and uncheck use lights. Then go over the top of the heart like we just did with the balloons. When you're finished, lower the layer opacity to around 0.75 or to your liking. I'll also move it below the text layer. And now we're done with the grease pencil portion. The last few elements we'll add are the balloon strings. Now, these balloons are not directly connected to the heart, just kind of behind it. But again, the strings will be centered at our balloon control empty, at the world origin. Set the cursor to the world origin with Shift-C. Also, if you ever get this slow scrolling while zooming in, select an object near the world origin like this empty and hit numpad decimal to reset that. Hit Shift-A to bring in a new Bezier curve and bring it to the top of the balloons. In Object Data Properties under Geometry, set the depth to 0.01 meters. Then go to the Material Properties tab and click this button to bring in the outline material. Tab into Edit mode, hit A to select all, and right-click to set the spline type to Poly. Select the left point and hit Shift-S to set Selection to Cursor, which is at the world origin. Then tab into Object mode, select one of the balloons, and tab into Edit mode. With Point Select, select the point at the base of the balloon and hit Shift-S to set cursor to selected. Tab into Object mode, select the curve, and tab into Edit mode. Select the right point and hit Shift-S to set selection to cursor. And now we have our first string. Go into Object mode, select the next balloon, and tab into Edit mode. Select the point at the base and set the 3D cursor to it. Tab into Object Mode, click back on the curve, duplicate it with Shift D, and escape to leave it where it's at. Tab into Edit Mode. Select the top point and hit Shift S to set the selection to the cursor. Then repeat this process for all the other balloons, setting the cursor and connecting the curves. Also, hide the grease pencil object if it helps. Depending on how many balloons you have, this process is a little tedious, but it'll go by fast. Now, I want this arrangement to animate up and down slightly. In Object Mode, set the cursor back to the world origin with Shift C. Hit Shift A and bring in an empty cube. I'm going to shift it along the Y to the front. Shift select all the elements except the other camera empty, and then the cube last. Then hit Ctrl P to parent with Object Keep Transform. Go to frame 1, select the cube, and bring it down slightly with G then Z. Hit I to keyframe the location. Go to frame 60, bring it up in the Z slightly, and hit I to keyframe the location again. Then duplicate the frames at 1 and put it at 120. To have it repeat, switch the editor type to the graph editor. Expand the Object Transforms dropdown and select Z location. Hit N to bring up the timeline side menu, go to the modifiers, and add a cycles modifier. If we play this back, this animation should repeat for the entire duration. Change the editor back to the dope sheet. Now we're finished with our balloon arrangement. Let's go over some extra settings and compositing. On the grease pencil object, I added a noise modifier to give it a subtle shake. Click on the grease pencil object, go to the Modifier Properties tab, and bring in a noise modifier. Lower the position to about 0.05. Then go to the Render Properties tab and toggle Bloom. This is going to help amplify the glow in our scene. Then go to the View Layer Properties tab and under Data, make sure Z is checked. This will ensure Grease Pencil respects the Z depth of meshes. Go to the Compositing tab, and let's render out a scene to have in our background if one doesn't show up. I'll also collapse this side menu with N. Hit Shift A and bring in a glare node. Place it right after the Render Layers node and set it to Simple Star, High, and the threshold to around 0.7 to 0.8. This will give a slight glow to our entire composition, and the lower the threshold, the higher the glow. Feel free to add more nodes as needed. Now, to render this out, go to the Output Properties tab. Under Output, designate a location to render out your scene. For file format, you can either select a sequence of images or a video. If doing a video, select FFmpeg video for file format. Then go to encoding and change the container to MPEG-4. Go to Output Quality and set it to perceptually lossless. And then we can render this out by going to Render at the top and selecting Render Animation. For extras, I'm going to walk through some tips and what I did to create the larger arrangement as seen in the beginning. So the first is adding a glow effect on the grease pencil object in addition to the rim effect. I didn't mention it in the official steps as everyone's system is different, but it'll help all the elements appear brighter in your render. If you want to try it out, you can apply a glow effect by going to the Visual Effects Properties tab. The settings I've used are 10 pixels in the X and Y, samples 12, and glow under toggled. The next thing is that you can overdo it on the specs. Make sure you have the layer blending mode set to add or they'll look too bright. If you find that you have too many, you can use the sculpting tools to lessen the opacity and sizing of the strokes. If you want to uniformly scale all the specs, you can go to the Object Data Properties tab and under Adjustments, scale down the stroke thickness. I find that working with smaller sizes looks better since we already have effects applied. For the balloons, I obviously have more here, but my approach to color was slightly different. In total, I have 8 materials as opposed to the 6 we made. This is because with more balloons, the arrangement easily looked fragmented. So I created new ones specifically to help transition between colors and make the arrangement look cohesive. I added a yellow and turquoise material. Around the balloon, I have these clouds which were made using a combination of meshes with a procedural material and grease pencil elements. With the grease pencil brushes we installed, I used the oil paintbrush to create these pink clouds around the heart, and they were easily manipulated in Sculpt and Vertex color mode. If you want to learn more about this technique, you can check out my Jungle Treehouse video where I walk through a similar workflow. Lastly, I have this particle system instancing these grease pencil blobs and these animated stars. And that's it for the tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I know I haven't put out a lot of in-depth tutorials, so if you want to see another one, you can check out the stylized microscope tutorial over on the CG Boost channel. It features a different shader and line art method. Also, if you'd like to learn more about Grease Pencil, you can check out my course I released with CG Boost called Master Grease Pencil in Blender. In the course, I'll walk through everything you need to know to get started with Grease Pencil, from exercises to completing an entire medieval fantasy village scene. This is meant to be a primer on the tool so you can create projects of your own. You can find it on the CG Boost website, and I'll leave links below. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And if you do end up making this balloon greeting, feel free to tag me on social media at KevAndRam. Thanks again, and see you guys next time.